My name is Claire, and tonight my husband raised a crystal flute, smiled at his mother, then turned to a room full of people who have never truly seen me, and said, I sold the company shares, $45 million, as if he had wrestled fortune with his bare hands and not scrawled my name on a line he had no right to touch. The room went up like dry leaves. His brother Gary whistled. Aunt Ruth slapped the marble island and shouted bravo over the clatter of ice and cutlery. There was a chorus of smart move, and about time, and the soft, satisfied hum that older people make when they believe the world has finally rewarded one of their own. My husband David soaked in it all the warm lamps, the shine of the hardwoods I'd had refinished last spring, the champagne bubbles snapping like tiny affirmations. He looked like a man in a magazine ad, etched jawline perfect gray at the temples, just dangerous enough to win your trust and your signature. I did what Southern women and Midwestern women and women from tight-lipped families everywhere were trained to do. I smiled. I kept my hand steady around the stem of my glass. If you had looked only at my face, you might have thought I approved. If you had watched my throat, you would have seen it refuse to swallow. Our dining room had never been more American than it was that night. There were deviled eggs with too much paprika because Ruth always forgets her hand is heavy. There were shrimp cocktail rings that tasted faintly of the grocery store but looked expensive in Mom's crystal. A spiral-cut ham wore its lacquer like a church-going woman wears pearls. The grandkids played tag and sock feet down the hallway, sliding on the runner I'd chosen because it stayed put. The house smelled like honey citrus rind and just a whisper of floor polish. Ordinary, comfortable, blessed, that's what the room thought it was. But every blessing can become a witness. Tomorrow, David announced, milking the pause, we fly to Phoenix. Maybe Sedona. We'll pick a place and stay as long as we please. He slid his arm along the back of my chair, 2 fingers resting on my shoulder, a proprietary pose that had charmed me 20 years ago, and now felt like a label I hadn't chosen. Long vacation, he said, eyes on me, for the whole family. We've earned it. His mother dabbed at her eyes with a cocktail napkin. Your father would be proud, son. My father, if he had been alive, would have asked to see the paperwork. Someone turned up the Frank Sinatra playlist. Gary clinked his spoon against a glass. To David, the man who finally made this family's legacy pay. More cheers, more laughter. I watched him tilt his head, that little diagonal movement he used, whenever he wanted me to laugh at a joke I didn't find funny. He wanted me to bless his lie with my smile. I gave him something else, stillness. One of the grandkids, Molly, the serious one with the cowlick, slid in next to my chair and leaned on my arm. Grandma Claire, can I have the piece with the extra glaze? I fixed her a plate and showed her how to use the tiny silver tongs so her fingers wouldn't burn. She went off happy. In families like ours, happiness is often a plate you assemble for someone else and never taste yourself. People think betrayal arrives with a slammed door. Sometimes it arrives with well-chosen napkins, a Bluetooth speaker, and a husband who never met a mirror he didn't admire. David had always liked a stage. He grew up in a ranch house with a carport and a father who measured success in inches of lawn. He loved telling my father back when my father was alive how he'd take the company national, how he'd modernize, how he'd make us nimble and global. My father would cross his arms and say, "Steady wins. We don't gamble with payroll." Their arguments were like college football loud seasonal ending with something fried. When cancer tilted my father's world, he made 2 things clear. I would inherit control, and the company would stay rooted. No debt, it couldn't service no acquisitions, that smelled like a story instead of a spreadsheet. He left me not David, 51%, and the chairmanship spelled out in language so clear even grief couldn't blur it. David made himself indispensable in the months after the funeral. Late nights, pivot tables, new software, sleek decks, full of arrows pointing up. He took to calling my father Dad posthumously, as if names were lockers you could claim once the hallway emptied. Claire Aunt Ruth called from the kitchen. "Pass through this glaze is sinful. You must share the recipe I gave it to her brown sugar Dijon, a splash of bourbon." And she laughed at the bourbon, pretending to be shocked. I have found that in life, People prefer recipes to rules. They look the same on a card, but one will save your dinner and the other will save your soul. 45. Gary repeated, like he was learning a new hymn. 45 million. He leaned toward David. What's next, big man? Boats. A place on the lake. Not a boat, David said, as if boats were for men still checking their reflection. I'm thinking an investment house somewhere we can park this properly. He dropped liquidity and harvest and tax strategy like confetti. Every time he said we, he meant himself. Every time he said ours, he meant mine. I caught my reflection in the mirror above the sideboard, the one edged in gilt that my mother had rescued from a consignment shop when she decided our house should have a little glamour. There I was, a woman in her 60s, with good posture, a sensible bob, and eyes that had finally stopped apologizing for what they saw. I thought of my father's pen, heavy black, the brand name worn faint, and how he used to sign audit letters with a pause between first and last name, as if reminding the ink that reputation travels faster than money. Would you say a few words? Claire David asked. He adored handing me microphones. He believed my voice completed his portrait. The room turned to me. Forks stilled. Even Molly stopped mid-bite, sugar shining on her lip. I rose because years of church basements and PTA meetings had taught my legs to rise. I held my glass where the light could pass through it. Congratulations, I said, and let the word stand on its thin little feet. It's a big number. A ripple of laughter, a sigh of relief. They preferred me generous, and I have been generous far longer than most women would advise. I glanced toward the side door where the mudroom meets the garage. The deadbolt I'd had installed last winter caught the light. We used to keep that door open, at parties, kids in and out, neighbors coming by, with extra folding chairs. Lately I liked hearing the click. People who love you don't mind earning entry. Let's eat, I said, and the room exhaled, and Ruth blessed the ham in a tone that made the Lord sound like her bridge partner. Platters moved. Sinatra crooned about flying to the moon. David came close enough for me to smell the expensive aftershave he uses when he wants to be taken seriously. Nice, he said, voice low, classy. He kissed the air by my cheek, so no lipstick would transfer. Knew you'd be a good sport. Sport. A game with rules he selects and referees he buys. I set my glass down and touched the edge of the linen runner, smoothing a place no one else would notice. There's a part of every long marriage that is housekeeping, sorting, folding, mending, what can be mended, letting go of what can't. I have folded apologies until the seams wore thin. I have mended trust with invisible thread. I have let go of more than you can see when you stand in my kitchen and say, "What a lovely home." Tonight I placed one more thing in its proper drawer, the knowledge that David believed the number 45 could buy silence. I turned to Molly, who had returned to ask if whipped cream counted as a vegetable. Tonight it does, I told her, and she grinned like a girl whose future hasn't yet learned the price of paperwork. When everyone sat and plates filled and the familiar chime of silver against china steadied the room, I allowed myself a single private thought, the kind that floats up when you've polished a day to its calmest shine. He thinks the story ends at 45. He doesn't know a story can end on a single line, the one where a name belongs to the hand that owns it. David raised his glass again, loving applause the way some men love oxygen. To family, he declared. The room answered, to family. I looked at him over the rim of my glass and decided not to drink. He thought he'd won. He had no idea what was coming. When you're married long enough, you start to measure time not by birthdays or Christmases, but by renovations and crises. The year of the new roof. The year his mother broke her hip. The year he said we should modernize the company, and I said slow down, and he smiled that smile men use when they've already made the decision. David and I met in 1987, back when I still believed competence was love. I was my father's daughter, calm, deliberate, proud of the company he built, from a single repair shop into a mid-sized manufacturing firm with 200 employees and a reputation for honesty that could buy you credit anywhere in the Midwest. David was a young operations analyst, sharp suits, cheap cologne full of talk about efficiency metrics and scaling potential. My father liked men who worked with their hands, but he was getting older, and I think he saw in David a future that looked more like Wall Street than Main Street. David courted me with spreadsheets and certainty. He brought me coffee during late nights at the office, asked about my favorite books, pretended to like the same ones. He called me steady. Claire said it like it was a compliment. When we married, the wedding was small but elegant, just family and a few close friends at the country club. He cried during the vows. My father, who had never cried in front of me, patted his shoulder afterward and said, "Take care of her son." I wish I'd written that sentence down somewhere. Maybe then I'd remember the exact tone, whether it was a blessing or a warning. The first years were good. David was charming, ambitious, and to his credit, disciplined. He worked long hours, brought home roses. When contracts closed, remembered anniversaries. I built my own rhythm beside him, board meetings, charity drives, and Sunday dinners, where my father still sat at the head of the table, presiding with quiet authority. David called him Sir Then, half respect, half performance. My father tolerated it. Men like them always orbit each other, one burning hot one holding gravity. After my father's heart surgery, things shifted. David began taking more initiative at work, rewriting job descriptions, restructuring departments. "We need to be leaner," he said. "We can't run a 20th century company in the 21st. He wasn't wrong, but his tone had changed. It wasn't suggestion anymore, it was declaration. I remember one particular meeting in 2005. My father sat at the end of the conference table, pale a blanket over his knees. David presented a glossy slide deck about an acquisition some tech startup in Chicago that made automation software. "It'll make us competitive," he said. My father looked at me, then at him. "We make things, son," he said softly. "We don't gamble." David laughed, that sharp little exhale he used when someone didn't get it. "It's not gambling, sir. It's strategy." When my father left the room, he leaned toward me and whispered, "He's outdated, Claire. We can't let sentimentality kill opportunity." That was the first time I felt a crack under my feet. Not big enough to fall through, but deep enough to echo. After my father passed, the reading of the will was quiet. The lawyer's voice filled the conference room like an engine idling. My father left my mother's jewelry to me, a small parcel of land to my cousin, and the company 51% of its shares to me, with the stipulation that I would chair the board. David got nothing formal, but he didn't seem to mind. "We're married," he said afterward, smiling as if paper ownership were an outdated concept. "What's yours is ours." For a while I believed that. He was attentive, supportive, even protective. When the recession hit in 2008, he stayed late every night, cutting costs, renegotiating with suppliers. He saved jobs. Employees respected him. The board praised him. I praised him too. But somewhere in those years, gratitude turned into dependence. He started speaking for me in meetings. Claire and I agree. We think this is the right move. Eventually, I stopped correcting him. It's easy to mistake peace for partnership. Our home life mirrored the company he chose, the cars, the investments, even the wine. He said he had a knack for numbers. I let him have it. Numbers bored me. I liked people. I handled the charity foundation, the mentorship programs, the Christmas bonuses. That was our balance. He earned, I nurtured. It looked perfect. It photographed well. Then came the promotion parties, the golf outings with investors, the whispered comments about legacy. I remember one night, our 20th anniversary, he raised a toast in front of friends and said, "To 20 years of building something that will outlive us." I smiled, but my chest ached. I couldn't tell whether he meant the marriage or the empire. There were small betrayals before the big one. A bank envelope he told me not to worry about. A business trip that ran long. A new assistant who lasted only a few months and left crying. Every time I asked, he had explanations, smooth as marble. I wanted to believe him. By 60, you learn that belief can be a form of self-defense. The last Christmas before the sale, he gave me a pen. A heavy black fountain pen, the kind my father used. "You'll need this for the next chapter," he said. I didn't know he meant it literally. In spring, our accountant sent over documents for minor share adjustments. I skimmed them, saw familiar signatures, mine among them, and filed them away. I didn't remember signing, but I trusted David. My father's old lawyer retired. The new one was David's friend from golf. One Friday in May, I stopped by the office to drop off cookies for the staff. The receptionist looked nervous. Mr. Lawson said you were out, she said. I laughed. Out where? She didn't answer. That afternoon, I checked my company email locked. My credentials had been updated. That night, David came home with champagne and that grin that meant trouble disguised as triumph. Good news, he said. We sold 20% of the company's holdings to a strategic partner. Big payout, sweetheart, $45 million. We're rich. He poured 2 glasses. I didn't lift mine. I asked. He kissed my forehead. Don't worry about the details. I handled it. When he fell asleep, I went to the home office and opened the locked drawer where we kept our files. There they were, contracts, wire transfers, emails with my signature neatly printed. The pen he'd given me sat beside them, a cruel souvenir. I turned off the light, sat in the dark, and let the hum of the refrigerator steady my breathing. I could have woken him, shouted, thrown the papers at his face. Instead, I whispered the words that would become my anchor. Document, don't react. By dawn, I'd scanned every file, backed up every message, and scheduled a meeting with a lawyer my father once trusted. By the time David bragged at that dinner, my case was already in motion. He thought he controlled the narrative. I was just letting the ink dry. Some people say you can tell a liar by his eyes. I disagree. The best liars look you straight in the face and hold their gaze calm as saints. David was one of those. When he forged my signature, he didn't tremble or hesitate. He practiced. Probably at his desk late at night, tracing my name over and over like a teenager, copying a pop star's autograph. He'd watched me sign for decades, mortgages, contracts, holiday cards. My handwriting was part of his landscape. All he needed was a quiet afternoon and access to our joint filing cabinet. The company's notary was an old friend. 1 bottle of bourbon and a favor was enough to make anything official. I didn't discover the forgery by luck. It was habit. My father taught me to read the fine print of everything, even sympathy cards. After that dinner, after David's champagne-fueled celebration, I couldn't sleep. The air in our house felt heavy, perfumed with his victory. I padded to the kitchen for water, saw the briefcase he'd left open near the bar. Papers spilled like secrets. I should have turned away. But betrayal has its own gravity. The folder on top bore my name, Claire L. Lawson, typed neatly, followed by a digital copy of my signature. Except it wasn't mine. My real signature has a loop that widens at the end like an open door. This one slammed shut. I stared at it until dawn. Every story has a moment when innocence dies quietly in a well-lit room. That was mine. I printed everything. Every page, every email. Then I called a number I hadn't used in years. Ben Garner, my father's old attorney. His voice came through rough with sleep. "Claire," he said, "I thought you'd forgotten about old lawyers." "I wish I had," I told him. "Can you meet me tomorrow?" He met me in his small downtown office where the walls were lined with dusty law books and photos of long-gone mayors, shaking his hand. He listened as I laid out the papers on his desk. He didn't interrupt, didn't dramatize. When I finished, he looked up with eyes that had seen too many bad marriages. "You understand what this means," he said. "If we go after him, it'll go public. There's no quiet way to undo a crime this loud." "I don't want quiet," I said. "I want truth." Ben nodded slowly. "You'll need proof beyond the papers. Witnesses, digital traces, timestamps. You're sure you want to do this?" "Yes," I said, "but not yet. Let him dig deeper." That was the beginning of the longest act I've ever performed. At home, I played my part perfectly, the supportive wife, the gracious hostess. I asked about the vacation plans offered to help him pack. He joked about how he deserved a break after making history. I agreed. All the while, my phone recorded everything from his casual mentions of our deal to the calls where he bragged to his brother about finessing the paperwork. Ben and his small team began tracing the sale. The $45 million wasn't just sitting in one account. David had split it across multiple shell companies, some tied to relatives, others to his old college friends. Classic laundering dressed up as tax strategy. One night, Ben called me with news. "We found the transfer logs," he said. "He forged your authorization using a PDF editor. There's metadata showing the edits came from his laptop." I hung up and sat in the dark living room, staring at the faint glow of the security alarm light. Part of me felt sick. The other part felt strangely calm. Justice doesn't roar, it whispers, promising you patience. A week later, David hosted a dinner for his bored allies. I stood in the kitchen, refilling wine glasses, listening to their laughter drift through the open door. "She's fine with it," I heard him say. "Claire knows it's best for all of us." That line hit me harder than any insult. He wasn't just stealing from me, he was erasing me. The next morning, I visited the company's IT department under the pretense of updating my credentials. The young technician, nervous kind, helped me access the internal servers. I copied the entire email archive to a flash drive and locked it in my purse. Evidence, not vengeance. By then, Ben had looped in a handwriting expert and a forensic accountant. They built the case slowly, methodically. I learned to live in the silence between their updates. I tended my garden-hosted book club, sent thank you cards. Every gesture of normalcy became armor. At night, I'd stand by the bedroom window, watching David's reflection in the glass as he scrolled through his phone. He laughed sometimes, little bursts of pride. I wondered if he was texting his accomplice or just admiring himself in the glow. Either way, the image stuck a man illuminated by his own undoing. 2 months before everything unraveled, Ben suggested we file the preliminary complaint. If we time it right, he said the notice will arrive when he least expects it. I smiled. "A dinner, maybe." He chuckled. "You have a flair for drama, Claire." I learned from the best I said. The night before the papers were served, I cleaned the dining room, the same one where David had toasted his success. The silver gleamed, the wood smelled of lemon oil. It looked exactly as it had that first night, except for me. I wasn't the quiet woman waiting for my turn to speak. I was the silence before thunder. I left the documents in Ben's hands and went to bed early. David stayed up late watching sports highlights, shouting at the screen like a teenager. I lay still, listening to his voice fade into the rhythm of commercials. At 2 a.m., I slipped out of bed and walked to my office. I opened my journal, the one my father gave me years ago, and wrote a single line. He forged my name. "Tomorrow, I reclaim it." When the first light broke through the blinds, I brewed coffee and sat at the table. I heard him in the shower humming. He came out in a white shirt, adjusting his cufflinks. "Big day," he said. "Yes," I answered. "It is." He didn't notice the extra car parked across the street, or the faint scent of cologne lingering on the documents that would arrive in hours. At 9 sharp, Ben's assistant filed the motion. At 10, the judge signed the order to seize the assets pending investigation. By noon, 2 officers and a process server stood at our door. But that moment, the knock belongs to another chapter. For now, remember this: when a man forges your name, he writes his own sentence. The knock came the next morning, steady and polite, the kind of knock you'd give a neighbor before borrowing sugar. David was buttering toast, talking about flights to Phoenix. He looked over his shoulder, annoyed. "Who the hell is that this early?" He opened the door, still chewing, expecting a delivery. Instead, there was a man in a charcoal suit and a woman with a briefcase. "Mr. Lawson," the man asked. "I'm Mark Jensen, attorney for Mrs. Claire Lawson. This is Ms. Patel from the county clerk's office." David blinked, his mouth still half open. "That's my wife," he said, jerking his thumb toward me. "Why would she need—" Ms. Patel interrupted gently. "Sir, these are legal documents. You've been served." I didn't move. I watched from the kitchen, coffee cup in hand. Steam curled like breath on a cold morning. "You can set them on the table," I said. My voice came out steady, calm, the voice I used when settling insurance disputes or telling a contractor he'd installed the tile wrong. They placed the folder on the table, nodded, and left. The door clicked shut. David turned color draining from his face. "Claire, what is this?" "Paperwork," I said. "You like paperwork." He flipped open the top sheet. The heading read, "Petition for Declaratory Judgment Forgery and Misrepresentation." Beneath that, a list of exhibits, contracts, emails, bank transfers, digital records. His hands trembled just slightly. "This is a mistake," he said, laughing too loud. "A misunderstanding. You don't want to—" "I do," I said. He took a step toward me. "We can talk about this privately." "Everything about this is private," I said, "until it isn't." That line hung in the air like the last note of a song nobody clapped for. He read more. His breathing went shallow. "You went to Ben Garner." "That old man?" "He outlived your secrets," I said. Outside, a garbage truck clattered down the street. The ordinary world kept turning while ours cracked. He tried a different tactic, his voice softening. Claire, you don't understand business. These deals move fast. I did this for us, for our future. Our future doesn't require a forged signature. He dropped the papers on the floor where they fanned out like fallen leaves. You destroy me over a technicality. I looked at him for a long time. You destroyed yourself when you stopped telling the truth. He paced the kitchen, muttering numbers, lawyers, damage control. Finally, he grabbed his phone. I'm calling Gary, he said. He'll know what to do. Gary's name is on one of the shell accounts, I said quietly. You might want to let him finish breakfast first. He froze. You went through my files. You went through my life. His jaw clenched. You're vindictive. I'm thorough. By mid-morning, the news had reached the office. Ben called to tell me the injunction had been filed, assets frozen. It's official, he said. He can't move a dollar until the hearing. Good, I said. Let him sit still for once. Around noon, his mother called. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail full of disbelief. He wouldn't do that, Claire. You must be mistaken. I deleted it. By evening, David was pacing like a caged animal. You think the board will believe you? They'll side with me. I'm the one who built that company up. I poured wine and didn't answer. Silence has weight. It shapes men like him faster than argument ever could. He slammed his hand against the counter. Say something. I did. The board already knows. The subpoena was delivered an hour ago. He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. You planned this? Yes. When? The night you gave me that pen. His mouth opened, then closed again. For once, there was nothing left to sell. The next days blurred into hearings and statements. Ben handled most of it. I sat through depositions like a ghost in a well-tailored suit. David's lawyer tried to argue duress, miscommunication, intent. But evidence doesn't blink. The judge ordered forensic analysis, metadata timestamps, handwriting comparisons. Each report nailed another board into David's coffin. At one session, his brother Gary showed up red-faced, whispering, You didn't have to do this to family. I turned to him. Then family shouldn't have done it to me. Reporters began circling, sniffing for scandal. I refused interviews. The story was already loud enough. At home, David packed a suitcase. Just until this blows over, he said. I let him go. The quiet that followed was heavy but clean. For the first time in years, the house didn't hum with his self-importance. It just breathed. A week later, the board called an emergency meeting. They voted to suspend him pending the outcome of the case. His chair sat empty. I took my father's old seat again. The room felt smaller, humbler. I opened the meeting with a single sentence. We will rebuild the right way. No applause, no toast, just nods. That night I found his last message on the answering machine. Claire, he said, voice hoarse, I made a mistake. Don't ruin me over this. But revenge isn't about ruin. It's about restoration. When the court finally ruled, the verdict was simple forgery, confirmed restitution, ordered ownership, reinstated. His name would be removed from company filings within 30 days. He didn't show up for the final hearing. His lawyer read a statement about personal health. I signed the closing documents with the same black pen he'd once used to steal from me. As I walked out of the courthouse, a reporter called Mrs. Lawson. Do you have anything to say? I paused, then said, Just this integrity compounds faster than interest. The quote made the evening news. My father would have smiled. That night I sat alone at the kitchen table, a fresh cup of coffee, steaming beside the now-faded contract copies. Outside, crickets sang. Inside, peace finally had a sound. The morning after the court order, the house felt too clean, like a stage after the curtain drops. I made coffee the way I always did, strong enough to stand a spoon upright, and stood at the window, watching the maple leaves scatter across the driveway. The news trucks had finally gone. David's car was gone too. There was no victory dance, just quiet. The kind of quiet that asks, now what? Ben called mid-morning. The next step's procedural, he said. Asset division restitution. He'll try to appeal, but he doesn't have a leg to stand on. I know, I said. I just need a moment before I become paperwork again. He chuckled softly. You've got the soul of an accountant and the patience of a saint. Rest a little. You've earned the silence. After the call, I went for a walk through town. People I'd known for decades pretended not to stare. Some gave me polite nods, others pitying smiles. In small American towns, scandal is entertainment until it happens to someone you've shared pie with. The hardware store owner called out, "Heard the news, Claire. Good for you standing your ground." I thanked him and kept moving. It wasn't pride that filled me. It was steadiness. For 63 years, I'd been told women like me were supposed to endure, to forgive, to stay pleasant for the sake of reputation. I'd done that long enough to learn endurance can turn into complicity. At home, I opened my laptop and read the official email all company shares have been reinstated to Claire Lawson as primary shareholder and chairwoman. I sat back in my chair. The digital version of justice looked so ordinary, Times New Roman 12-point font. But to me, it gleamed. That afternoon, Gary showed up unannounced. He stood awkwardly on the porch, holding a pie from the store bakery. "Peace offering," he said. "Blueberry," I asked. "Your favorite?" he said, forcing a smile. "Look, Claire, he's family. We all make mistakes." "Forgery's not a mistake, Gary. It's math premeditation plus arrogance equals downfall." He sighed. "He's broke, Claire. You've taken everything." I didn't take anything I said. I just stopped giving. He didn't argue. He left the pie and drove away, tires crunching gravel. I set it on the counter untouched. Some things are better as symbols than desserts. That night, the lawyer handling David's restitution called. "He's agreed to return what's left," she said. 2 properties and a few accounts offshore." "Let him keep whatever he can carry in his hands," I replied. "The rest belongs to honesty." After she hung up, I walked through the house, turning off lights, room by room. Each darkened lamp felt like closing a chapter. In our bedroom, his side of the closet was bare. No shirts, no ties, no cologne bottles lined in military order, just air. I exhaled and realized I hadn't really breathed in months. The following week, I returned to the company. The employees gathered awkwardly in the lobby, unsure whether to clap. I saved them the trouble. "We're going back to our roots," I said. "We build things that last. That includes trust." Applause followed, gentle but sincere, the rhythm of relief. Later that day, I sat in my father's old office, the chair reupholstered the desk, still scarred with small nicks from his ring. I ran my fingers over the grooves. "We're home, Dad," I whispered. Ben dropped by with a small gift, the original copy of the first contract my father ever signed. "For the wall," he said, "a reminder of why you fought." I smiled. He'd have liked that. He always said a signature should mean something. "Yours still does," Ben said. When he left, I hung the document on the wall behind the desk, right where David's framed Entrepreneur of the Year certificate used to be. The balance felt restored. But peace has its own aftertaste, bittersweet like coffee left too long on the burner. Nights stretched wide and quiet. I read, listened to talk radio, took long drives with no destination. Everywhere I went, people treated me like a survivor. The truth is, I didn't survive something sudden. I endured something gradual, and endurance leaves traces like fingerprints on glass. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed in David's handwriting. No return address. Just a single line inside, "I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to be more than your husband." I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer with the other documents, proof of everything, even his last confession. Some wounds heal faster when you don't pick at them. Weeks passed. Leaves turned red, then fell. The lawsuit faded from headlines. I went back to volunteering at the library, teaching teenagers how to draft resumes. Sometimes they'd ask about my career. I'd smile and say I learned the hard way, that your name is your legacy. Guard it. They didn't always understand, but they nodded politely. On the anniversary of the verdict, I invited the entire company staff to a luncheon at the plant. We served barbecue and potato salad the way my father would have. I raised my glass. "To the ones who stayed honest," I said, "and to lessons learned no matter how expensive." Laughter followed, soft and knowing. That evening, I came home to find a small envelope slid under the door. Inside was a check from one of the seized accounts made out to me, signed by David. The note read, "For what's left of my conscience." I tore it in half. Redemption isn't currency you can mail. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I poured a cup of tea and stood at the same window where I'd once watched officers walk up our driveway. The maple leaves glowed amber in the last light. The air smelled of rain and distance. I didn't feel triumphant, just balanced. Justice isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, a heartbeat returning to its rightful pace. And that was enough. Courtrooms are designed to make you feel small. The ceilings are high, the wood is dark, and even the clocks seem to tick with judgment. When I walked into ours for the first hearing, I felt my spine lengthen in self-defense. I was not there to be small. I was there to be exact. Ben slid a legal pad toward me and whispered, "Breathe slow. Let the paper take your worry." I smiled. The paper had already taken so much wire transfers, emails, contracts, my name bent into a shape it had never agreed to. Today, it could carry the rest. David arrived 5 minutes late, flanked by a new lawyer with a haircut that said television and a suit that said billable. He didn't look at me. He studied the floor as if it might offer him a trap door. His mother sat behind him, lips thin, a tissue balled in her fist. Gary leaned forward in the pew, knuckles on his knees, the posture of a man preparing to argue with a referee. When the judge took the bench, the room stood and then settled like a tide. She had the careful, bored expression of someone who has seen every way a person can justify what they wanted to do anyway. "We're here on Lawson versus Lawson," she said. And there it was. Our marriage boiled down to a caption line. Ben moved first. He introduced the exhibits in a calm voice that never rose above reasonable emails showing the step-by-step construction of the sale. Metadata tracing the PDF edits to David's work laptop. A notary log with a timestamp that placed me inconveniently for David at a charity luncheon when my signature was supposedly witnessed in a conference room across town. The handwriting expert took the stand and talked about pressure points and slant about how authenticity lives in the rhythm between letters. "Mrs. Lawson opens her L like a gate," he said, enlarging a sample on the screen. "Mr. Lawson closes it like a lock." David's lawyer objected, argued about stress and confusion implied I'd approve the sale in spirit, if not in ink. The company needed agility, he said. Mr. Lawson acted in good faith under time pressure. The judge's eyebrow lifted a fraction, an old oak, considering whether to creak. "Good faith," she said, "does not counterfeit signatures." During a recess, I stood at the hallway water fountain, the kind that always tastes faintly of coins. A woman in a navy skirt suit approached me. "I'm from the paper," she said softly. "Off the record, why now?" I looked at the flimsy paper cone in my hand, at the dent my thumb had left. "Because he mistook my silence for permission," I said, "and because I prefer records to rumors." Back in the courtroom, Ben called the company's controller. She was nervous earnest, the kind of woman who double-checks everything and blames herself for other people's shortcuts. "Did you feel pressured to process the transfer?" he asked. She glanced at David. He said Mrs. Lawson had approved it. He said speed was essential. Ben nodded. "And when you received the copy of Mrs. Lawson's ID," she swallowed. "It had the wrong middle initial." Small things sink great ships. David finally took the stand. His lawyer guided him gently, like a man learning to speak again. "Did you intend to harm your wife?" "Never," David said. "I was protecting our legacy." He used our like a life preserver. When Ben's turn came, his questions were short enough to fit on a grocery list. "Who edited the PDF? I don't recall. Whose laptop? My assistant's, possibly. Your assistant who resigned 2 months prior." Silence. "Mr. Lawson, did you sign your wife's name?" David stared at the microphone as if it might answer for him. "I believed I had her consent," he said. Ben didn't blink. "That's not what I asked." The judge asked her own questions, which is never a good sign for the side that prefers fog. "Why didn't you simply ask your wife to sign?" she said. David's jaw flexed. "Timing." The judge let the word fall between us. "Timing," she repeated, "is not an excuse to steal." At the end of that day, she issued an interim order, assets frozen. David suspended from any managerial role pending final judgment, a forensic audit authorized. The gavel sounded like a cupboard shutting on a secret. David's mother made a small wounded sound. I wanted to touch her hand to say that grief has room for all of us, but mercy is not the same as forgetting. I walked past without breaking stride. The audit took weeks. The forensic accountants followed emails like breadcrumbs through the forest of David's ambition shell. LLCs named after fishing spots, a brokerage account disguised as a trust for future nieces and nephews, a consulting contract for Gary that paid him handsomely to consult on nothing. Each discovery landed in my inbox at odd hours. A quiet drumbeat found this traced that confirmed the other. I made tea, I answered politely, I stayed the course. Older women know the power of not rushing the pot. Meanwhile, the company worked. We cut 2 vanity projects, restored the apprenticeship program my father had loved, brought back a laid-off machinist who could coax a temperamental lathe into singing. At the first paycheck after his return, he stuck his head into my office and said, "Chairwoman, ma'am, the old place feels right again." I nodded and swallowed a lump I pretended was coffee. David called twice. I didn't answer. He left messages that swung from pleading to petulant. "We could still fix this, Claire, then later. You'll regret humiliating me like this." Regret has a tone. It wasn't in his voice. The final hearing drew a larger crowd: reporters, curious law students, a row of retirees whose mornings had room for theater. The judge looked less bored. She had conclusions to deliver. Ben went first, again steady. He spoke not of outrage, but of arithmetic dollars, diverted signatures, simulated minutes that contradicted alibis. He held up the pen David had gifted me the year before, a symbol, he said, of a boundary he intended to cross. He armed her with the tool he later used against her. That irony is not legally relevant, Your Honor, but it is morally clarifying. David's lawyer tried to summon sympathy. He described his client as a self-made man under pressure, a visionary hampered by an overly cautious spouse. "Ambition isn't a crime," he said. The judge folded her hands. "No," she answered, "but forgery is." When she read the ruling, the air shifted. The court finds that Mr. Lawson knowingly and intentionally forged the signature of Mrs. Lawson in order to facilitate the unauthorized transfer of company shares totaling $45 million. The court orders full restitution, voids the transfer, reinstates Mrs. Lawson's authority and ownership, and imposes a permanent injunction barring Mr. Lawson from acting in any fiduciary capacity within the company or its affiliates. Costs to the plaintiff. Referral to the district attorney for review is recommended. Recommended, a small word that can carry a life across a line. Behind me, someone whispered, "Good." I didn't turn. Praise is as perilous as pity. Outside, microphones bloomed like flowers after rain. Ben shielded me as best he could. I offered one sentence. "We're grateful for the court's clarity," and stepped aside. Clarity, not victory. I wouldn't let the story be about winning. It was about weight put back in the right places. That afternoon, the board met. We voted to rebuild reserves, to cease any arrangement that smelled like sparkle, to put the apprenticeship program on a formal track with community colleges. "Steady wins," I said, and the room, men and women who had watched me grow into my father's chair, nodded like parishioners repeating a creed. David did not return to the office. Rumor put him in a furnished apartment near the freeway, then with a cousin out by the lake. Gary sent me a text that said only, "You got what you wanted." I deleted it. What I wanted was never this tableau of ruin. What I wanted was the truth signed in a hand that could be trusted. Days later, an email arrived from the district attorney's office. They were opening a file. I closed my eyes and pictured the thin manila folder with my name, spelled correctly on the tab. Some endings are paperwork. Some salvations are too. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp low and the house breathing its honest breath. I opened my father's old journal, the one I'd started using when the lies began, and wrote, "Consequences are not revenge. They are the shape of the truth when you stop trying to bend it." I capped the pen and listened to the refrigerator hum, the steady hymn of a home set back in order. Justice like that hum isn't loud. It is consistent. It brings the temperature back where it belongs. Victory doesn't always roar. Sometimes it exhales soft, measured disbelieving. The day after the ruling, I woke up before sunrise, out of habit, half expecting to hear David's alarm. The shower running the radio tuned to the business channel. The house, however, was perfectly still. The silence didn't press this time. It opened. I brewed coffee, fed the cat, and sat by the window, watching a pale band of light crawl up the neighbor's fence. The world looked the same, yet it wasn't. The balance had shifted almost imperceptibly, like a table finally leveled after years of wobble. When Ben called to check in, his voice carried a smile. "The firm's proud of this one," he said. "You did good, Claire. I just did what had to be done," I answered. That's usually what heroes say. "I'm too old to be a hero. I just wanted peace." He chuckled. "Then I hope you enjoy it." I tried. That morning I walked through each room of the house like a curator cataloging artifacts. His absence had a shape: empty hangers, missing cufflinks, the faint indentation on the pillow beside mine. For years I'd organized my days around someone else's needs. Now time was my own again, but it didn't quite know what to do with itself. I spent the first week cleaning not out of grief, but reclamation. Every drawer became an archive of boundaries reestablished. The study was hardest. His scent clung to the leather chair. I opened the windows, let the February air scour the corners. Then I sat at the desk and opened my journal. He thought he could write my name for me, I wrote. He forgot I know how to spell freedom. That line stayed with me. At the company, people were polite in the way Americans are when they've read headlines about you. Some couldn't meet my eyes. Others offered awkward congratulations. I told the managers we were done chasing flash and leverage. "We'll build slowly," I said. "We'll build honestly." No one argued. Stability sounded like a luxury after months of spectacle. In March, the local Chamber of Commerce invited me to speak at their luncheon. "Tell your story," the organizer urged. "People need inspiration." I declined at first. Revenge isn't inspiration. But Ben convinced me otherwise. "You're not talking about revenge," he said. "You're talking about reclaiming your voice." So I went. The banquet hall smelled of coffee and ambition. I stood behind the podium and told them about trust, how it begins as a handshake and can end as a court order, how silence is not consent and decency isn't weakness. When I finished, the room didn't erupt. It simply stood one table at a time in quiet respect. That meant more than applause. Afterward, a young woman approached me, maybe 30, maybe married too young. She said, "My husband handles all our finances. He says I wouldn't understand." Her voice trembled. Should I ask to see everything? I took her hand. "Yes," I said. "Understanding isn't a privilege, it's protection." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, lights low, thinking about that girl and all the others who've been told knowledge is unladylike. My mother believed it. I did too once. We were wrong. Weeks passed. The weather softened. The company's quarterly reports showed steady profit. The world had moved on, as it always does. I still received the occasional letter addressed in David's slanted handwriting, never signed. Always vague, "I hope you're well." I think about the old days. They went into a drawer I rarely opened. Regret like clutter accumulates if you let it. In May, the board hosted a dinner in my honor, an anniversary of the firm's founding. They unveiled a plaque in memory of Robert Gaines, whose integrity built this house, in honor of his daughter, Claire Lawson, who kept it standing. The applause was polite, but warm. I thanked them, then told a story about my father balancing the company books by hand, every figure written twice because honesty deserves a double check. The laughter that followed felt real. Later, walking to my car under a canopy of streetlights, I felt something new: ease. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for another lie to surface. The next morning, I drove to the lake house my father had loved and unlocked the door. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I made tea, sat on the porch, and listened to the water lap the shore. Birds quarreled in the reeds, oblivious to human drama. I opened my notebook again. "Peace isn't the absence of noise," I wrote. "It's the sound of your own heartbeat when the shouting stops." A week later, I met with our apprentices, a group of young machinists learning the trade. One boy, shy but clever, asked Mrs. Lawson, "How do you know when someone's lying?" I thought for a moment. "Liars rush," I said. "They want the world to catch up to their version of events. Honest people can afford to wait." He nodded solemnly, as if I'd handed him a secret code. Maybe I had. By summer, I'd stopped thinking about David daily. Healing doesn't announce itself. It slips quietly into your routine. One afternoon, while sorting mail, I found a postcard from Sedona, the place he'd once bragged about visiting. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was simple. The desert teaches you to survive on less. I laughed. Maybe it was from him, maybe not. Either way, the irony was perfect. That evening, I hosted friends for dinner. Ben, a few board members, my neighbor Linda. We drank cheap wine and played old records. At one point, Ben raised his glass. To survival, he said. I corrected him gently. To self-respect. After everyone left, I stood in the doorway and watched fireflies pulse across the yard. The night smelled of honeysuckle. Somewhere a radio played an old Sinatra tune, and for once, I let it play without irony. In the months that followed, I gave small talks, wrote an op-ed for a local paper titled Integrity is Not Old-Fashioned, and started a scholarship for women entering business law. It felt right to turn the ashes into something useful. I never saw David again. Rumor placed him out west, maybe remarried, maybe not. Sometimes I wondered if he ever understood that the quiet that followed wasn't hatred, it was finality. I didn't wish him harm, just distance. Every so often when the house creaks at night, I think of the younger me, the one who smiled at that dinner table, pretending not to know. I want to tell her she was stronger than she realized. That revenge didn't come from rage, but from patience. From doing things properly, even when no one applauds. Last week I visited my father's grave. I brought fresh tulips, brushed the leaves away, and said it's all settled now. The wind stirred soft and cool as if he'd heard. Driving home, I took the long route through town, past the company, past the courthouse. The sky was wide and unbothered. Justice, I've learned, isn't a single act. It's a way of walking, measured, unhurried, certain. I parked, turned off the engine, and listened to the ticking of the cooling metal. Somewhere in that rhythm was the sound of everything I'd reclaimed. A year passed before I truly understood what peace costs. It isn't free, it's something you pay for with truth, patience, and the willingness to let go of people who will never apologize. By the following spring, my house no longer felt like a museum of someone else's success. It felt lived in again, warm, honest. The company had stabilized. We weren't making headlines anymore, and that was the point. Steady wins, that had been my father's motto, and now it was carved into the wood plaque outside the main office. The apprentices thrived, the veterans returned, and every paycheck went out on time. Some mornings I'd walk through the production floor just to hear the hum of machines and the laughter between shifts. That sound was more healing than any apology could be. Then came a letter from the district attorney's office. The state had declined to press criminal charges. Too much time, too many settlements. He's not going to jail, Ben said, watching my reaction carefully. I know, I said. Jail isn't where I wanted him. I just wanted him out of my story. Ben nodded relief, softening his shoulders. That, Claire, you've already achieved. I didn't feel cheated. Punishment and justice aren't twins. They're distant cousins who sometimes meet for coffee. What mattered was that the truth had been restored. A few months later, I received an invitation to a local awards gala honoring women of integrity in business. My first instinct was to decline. I didn't need another plaque or headline. But Ben insisted. You represent something to them, he said, not revenge resilience. The event was held in the same hotel where David and I had celebrated our 10th anniversary years ago. The chandeliers were still there, though dimmer now, as if even the light had grown older. I stood at the podium, hands steady. Integrity. I told the room isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up without asking the liar to hold your hand. Afterward, a man about my age approached me. My wife loved what you said, he told me. She's gone now, but she would have wanted me to tell you. That truth told calmly is the loudest kind. I thanked him. We stood together for a moment, two veterans of life's smaller wars. That night driving home, I thought about David not with anger, but with the kind of curiosity you reserve for old photographs. I wondered if he ever looked back and saw the moment it all began to unravel, the exact instant greed outweighed grace. Maybe he did. Maybe that was punishment enough. Back home, I poured a glass of wine and opened my journal. The pages were full now, every entry a breadcrumb leading out of the forest. I wrote one last note. Forgiveness is a door you can close gently from the inside. Then I closed the book and set it on the shelf beside my father's ledger. 2 records, both honest. That summer, I launched the Robert Gaines Foundation, a nonprofit offering scholarships to women studying law, finance, and ethics. The first group of recipients came to the office for a tour. One of them, a tall girl with sharp eyes, asked Mrs. Lawson, "How did you know you'd win?" "I didn't," I said. "I just knew I was right. She smiled like someone hearing a prophecy. Life became simpler. I planted a vegetable garden behind the house, adopted another stray cat, and learned how to fix the kitchen faucet without calling anyone. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full of ordinary grace. Sometimes I'd drive by the lake house and sit on the dock at sunset. The water reflected everything honestly, no distortion, no tricks. I'd close my eyes and let the wind move through my hair. If David ever saw me, then he wouldn't recognize the woman I'd become, and that was the best revenge of all. One evening while sorting old files, I found the black pen he'd once given me, the instrument of his own undoing. I almost threw it away. Instead, I placed it in a glass case on the bookshelf, labeled it in neat handwriting, Lesson Number 1, Know What You Sign. A friend from the Chamber of Commerce visited a few weeks later. "You seem lighter," she said, "like someone who's finished a long race." "I have," I replied. But the finish line wasn't what I expected. It was quieter, kinder. She looked around the room at the tidy desk and the framed contract on the wall. "You ever think about retiring?" I smiled. "Retirement is just another word for peace. I already have it." That fall, the local paper published a feature on the foundation. The headline read, "From Forged Signatures to Stronger Futures." It was clever, maybe too clever, but it made me laugh. I clipped the article and mailed a copy to the journalist who had once asked me why now I wrote in the margin, because later is too late. The holidays came and went. I hosted a small Christmas dinner for close friends. No speeches, no cameras, just laughter and pie. After they left, I stood by the window lights twinkling across the yard. I whispered a small prayer of thanks, not to God necessarily, but to endurance to the stubbornness of truth. Then I turned toward the microphone on my desk, the one I'd been using to record short reflections for a local radio program. I pressed the button and began speaking softly, my voice low, steady, intimate. If you're listening tonight, maybe you've been betrayed. Maybe someone you trusted took your name, your work, your faith in fairness. I won't tell you to forgive them quickly. I'll tell you to breathe, to learn, to let the truth walk at its own pace. Revenge doesn't have to be fire. Sometimes it's rebuilding in the daylight, one honest brick at a time. I paused, letting the silence carry. Then I added almost a whisper. And when peace finally arrives, don't rush it away. Let it sit with you. Let it remind you who you were before the noise. The red recording light flicked off. I leaned back, a small smile on my face. That message would air next Sunday, and maybe someone would hear it who needed to. As I shut down the recorder, I felt my father's voice somewhere deep inside, steady winds. Yes, it does. If you followed my story this far, take this with you. Integrity is quiet power. Speak it live, it protect it. And when life tests, you choose truth, even when your hands shake. Thank you for listening, for believing that calm can be stronger than chaos. If my story meant something to you, share it. Pass it forward. Maybe it will reach someone standing at their own kitchen window, wondering if justice is still possible.